You know that feeling that some words have the power to change entire lives? That a secret kept for decades can explode like a bomb at the most unexpected moment? I'm Marina Silva, a nurse for over 12 years. And that Tuesday morning, I became an involuntary witness to a revelation that would destroy and rebuild an entire family. But mainly, that would change my own life in ways I never imagined possible. It was 3 a.m. when I was assigned to care for Mrs. Helen Richardson in the ICU. She was 84 years old, had suffered a severe stroke 2 days earlier, and doctors weren't optimistic about her recovery. The family had been present from the beginning, as usually happens in these cases. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, some great-grandchildren, all taking turns in the waiting room, waiting for news, waiting for a miracle. What caught my attention from the first moment was this family's dynamic. There was tension in the air, not just the natural tension of those who are losing someone dear, but something more, something old, wounds that seemed never to have completely healed. The 3 children barely looked at each other. Charles, the oldest, a 62-year-old businessman, always in an impeccable suit even at the hospital. Beatrice, the middle child, 58 years old, a retired university professor, with that air of intellectual superiority that some people carry like a shield. And Robert, the youngest, 55 years old, a painter, with colorful clothes and a look that mixed sadness and resentment. In the first hours caring for Mrs. Helen, I noticed she was trying to communicate something. Her eyes moved urgently. Her mouth tried to form words that the stroke had stolen from her. I held her hand and said softly, "Mrs. Helen, you're safe. Your children are here. Do you want to see them?" She squeezed my hand with surprising strength for someone in her condition. Her eyes filled with tears, and she managed to move her head slightly in a gesture that could be yes or no. I wasn't sure. But there was urgency there, a desperate need to communicate something before it was too late. I called Dr. Mendez, the neurologist in charge. He examined Mrs. Helen carefully. "Marina, she's trying to speak. It's rare in cases like this, but it happens. Sometimes at the end, the brain finds alternative pathways. Let's try to help her." We brought an alphabet board, the old but effective method. I started pointing at letters, and Mrs. Helen would blink when I got it right. It was a slow, painful process, but she was determined. It took us almost 40 minutes to form the first words. Safe. Office. Will. Charles was called immediately. When he saw the words, his face went pale. "Mother, you don't need to worry about that now. The will is already with the lawyers. Everything is resolved." But Mrs. Helen became agitated. Her vital signs spiked. She continued blinking frantically. I went back to the alphabet. More words formed. No, another, truth. The confusion on Charles's face was genuine. Another will? Mother, what are you talking about? Beatrice and Robert entered the ICU, breaking visitation rules. But at that moment, no one cared. Everyone needed to understand what was happening. Mrs. Helen continued, letter by letter, word by word, using what remained of her strength to reveal something she had kept for decades. Safe. Behind. Painting. Father. Combination. Date. Birth. Robert. Robert was immediately confused. My birth date? Mom, I don't understand. Charles was already on the phone, calling someone to go to Mrs. Helen's house, the mansion in the upscale neighborhood where she had lived for over 50 years. The tension in the room was palpable. What could be in that safe that was so important that a woman on death's door was using her last strength to reveal? While we waited, I stayed with Mrs. Helen. I held her hand, wiped her tears, offered the only comfort I could. Presence. She looked at me with gratitude, but also with something more. Regret. Relief. Fear of what was about to happen. 2 hours later, Charles returned. In his hands, an envelope yellowed by time, sealed with red wax. His face was white as paper. "She did it," he said, his voice trembling. "We found the safe exactly where she said. But Mom..." He stopped, looking at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. "What is this?" Mrs. Helen gestured for him to open it. Charles looked at his siblings, who nodded nervously. With trembling hands, he broke the seal and removed several documents. He began reading silently, and I saw the exact moment his life changed. I saw the color drain from his face, saw his legs weaken, saw tears begin to roll uncontrollably. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't be true." Beatrice snatched the papers from his hands and began reading. Her reaction was even more dramatic. She dropped the documents on the floor and looked at her mother with a mixture of shock and betrayal. "Mother, how could you? How could you lie to us all these years?" Robert picked up the papers from the floor. Unlike his siblings, he read slowly, methodically. When he finished, he didn't look shocked. He looked relieved. There were tears in his eyes, but also a small smile. "I always knew there was something different," he said softly. "I always felt it." It was Beatrice who finally explained, her voice loaded with anger and pain. "Our brother Robert isn't our brother. He's our half-brother, son of another woman. And this..." She pointed to another document. "This is the birth certificate of a fourth daughter. A daughter Mom had and gave up for adoption 60 years ago. A daughter we never knew existed." The silence that followed was deafening. I was there, an involuntary witness to that devastating revelation, not knowing where to look, how to react. But what came next was even more shocking. Mrs. Helen looked directly at me. Her eyes, though tired and weak, had an intensity that paralyzed me. She began blinking again, asking for the alphabet. With monumental effort, she formed words that would make my own life crumble and rebuild in unimaginable ways. "Marina, you, my daughter." The world stopped. Simply stopped. I looked at those words on the board, read and reread, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but my brain refused to process. It must be a mistake. It must be the confusion from the stroke. It must be anything but what those words were saying. "No," I whispered, releasing Mrs. Helen's hand as if I'd been burned. "No, this isn't possible. There's a mistake. You're confused." But Mrs. Helen continued looking at me with that desperate intensity. Tears flowed freely down her face. She blinked again, forming more words. "Date, birth, March 23, 1987. I felt my legs weaken. It was my birth date. Exactly. How do you know that?" My voice came out as a strangled whisper. Charles, Beatrice, and Robert were looking at me now, processing what they were hearing. Beatrice was the first to find words. "You're the nurse taking care of her? This is impossible. This can't be coincidence." "It's not coincidence," the voice came from the door. It was Dr. Mendez, who had been observing everything. He approached me with an envelope I had never seen before. "Marina, before Mrs. Helen had the stroke, she came to me. Said she needed an urgent DNA test. Brought a hair sample she said was yours, collected from the brush you left in the staff locker room. She asked for absolute secrecy until she was certain." My world was crumbling. "You did a DNA test on me without my consent?" Anger began to boil inside me, an anchor to hold on to while everything else collapsed. "Not without consent," Dr. Mendez corrected. "I did hers, and asked the lab to check compatibility with samples from the hospital employee database, which we all provide when hired for medical emergencies. All legal, all within protocols." He handed me the envelope. My hands trembled so much I could barely open it. But there it was, in black and white. Probability of maternity, 99.97%. Mrs. Helen Richardson was my biological mother. I dropped the paper. I felt the room spin. 24 years of unanswered questions. 24 years wondering who my biological parents were. Why they abandoned me. If they ever wanted me. And now, on the most common shift of just another Tuesday, I discovered I had spent the last 2 days caring for the woman who gave birth to me and gave me up for adoption. I need to leave, I managed to say. I need air. I ran to the corridor, but my legs gave out before I got far. I sat on the cold hospital floor, leaning against the wall, unable to contain the tears that came in violent waves. My entire life was a lie. No, not a lie. Just incomplete. My adoptive parents, Joseph and Margaret Silva, were always honest with me about the adoption. They loved me as a daughter, gave me everything. But there was always that hole, that unanswered question. Why? I felt someone sit beside me. It was Robert. He didn't say anything immediately, just stayed there, sharing the silence, the shock, the confusion. Finally, he spoke. Welcome to the Richardson Family Secrets Club. I discovered I was another mother's son when I was 16. Heard my parents arguing. They never spoke openly about it, but there was always this distance, you know? Like I wasn't completely part of the family. How did you deal with it? I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Badly, he admitted with a bitter laugh. Very badly. I went into depression, distanced myself from everyone, almost destroyed my life. It took years of therapy to accept that complicated stories don't mean you weren't loved. It just means love sometimes comes wrapped in difficult decisions, in secrets people keep because they think they're protecting those they love. I stayed silent, processing his words. He continued. Look, I don't know you, don't know your story, but I can see in your eyes that you were loved, that you had a good life, and now you have the chance to know the other side of the story. The chance I never had, because my biological mother died before I could find her. But she abandoned me. The words came out loaded with ancient pain. She gave birth to me and gave me to someone else to raise. She was 17 years old, Robert said softly. It's in the document. 17 years old, unmarried, in 1987. Do you have any idea what that meant back then? The scandal? The shame that would fall on her and her family? I hadn't thought about that. I was so consumed by my own pain that I hadn't considered her side. A 17-year-old girl, pregnant, in a traditional family. The weight of social judgment, the fear, the loneliness. I went back to the ICU. Everyone was still there, processing their own bombs. Mrs. Helen saw me, and her tears started again. I approached the bed, sat in the chair beside it. I took her hand again, this time knowing exactly whose hand it was. Why now? I asked. Why reveal this now after so many years? She went back to the alphabet, each letter a monumental effort. Regret, forgiveness, time, running, out, needed, no, you, well. She looked for you, Charles said behind me, his voice softer now, the initial shock giving way to something more complex. 3 months ago, she hired a private investigator. He found you, discovered you were a nurse here at St. Luke's. Mom started coming for regular appointments here, always asking for you to attend when possible. She was getting to know you, from afar. Memories began to make sense. Mrs. Helen's frequent appointments, always asking specifically for me, the questions about my life, my family, if I was happy. I thought it was just a lonely lady wanting to talk, but she was reconstructing the 24 years we had lost, one fragment at a time. She wanted to tell you personally, Beatrice added, her voice still loaded with emotion but less hostile. She was planning it, and then had the stroke, and realized she didn't have more time. I looked at that woman in the bed, so fragile, so close to the end. My mother. The word sounded strange in my mind. I already had a mother, Margaret Silva, who raised me with love and dedication. But this woman was also my mother. The one who gave me life. Who carried a painful secret for almost 25 years. Before continuing, I need to pause here because I know many of you also carry your own complicated family stories. Secrets that weigh heavy. Relationships that were never simple. And I want you to know you're not alone in this journey. If these stories touch you like they touch me, if you find a piece of your own experiences in these narratives, I invite you to be part of our family here. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Because every week I bring stories that remind us we're all human, all imperfect, all doing the best we can with the cards life gave us. And tell me here in the comments, have you ever discovered something about your family that completely changed how you saw your story? How did you deal with it? Your experiences matter. Every word you share here helps someone going through something similar. We're in this together. The next 3 days were the most intense and confusing of my life. I continued caring for Mrs. Helen, now with knowledge that changed everything. Each time I checked her vital signs, each time I adjusted her medication, each time I held her hand, I was doing it for my biological mother. And it was strange, painful, but there was also something there I didn't expect. A connection. My adoptive parents came to the hospital as soon as I told them. Margaret held my hands and said exactly what I needed to hear. Marina, you've always been our daughter and always will be. But this woman gave you life. And if you want to know her, have this time with her, we understand. Actually, we encourage you. You deserve to know your complete story. It was Joseph who added the perspective I needed. You know, Marina, I always wanted you to find your origins when you were ready. But I never imagined it would happen like this, so suddenly. But maybe it's better this way. No time to create unrealistic expectations. No years of searching and possible disappointment. Just the truth. Raw and honest. On the 4th night, I asked to stay with Mrs. Helen outside my work hours. Charles, Beatrice, and Robert had processed the situation, and surprisingly, received me not with hostility, but with cautious curiosity. Robert especially became a bridge, someone who understood what it was like to be the family's secret. I sat beside Mrs. Helen's bed and began to talk. I told about my childhood in a middle-class neighborhood, about the wonderful parents who raised me, about how I discovered I was adopted at 8 years old, and didn't care because love never had anything to do with blood. I told about deciding to be a nurse because I wanted to care for people, wanted to make a difference in someone's life. And while I spoke, I saw silent tears stream down her face. She couldn't respond with words, but her eyes said everything. Pride, perhaps. Relief knowing her choice, as painful as it had been, gave me a good life. Then I took the alphabet and let her tell me her story. Letter by letter, word by word, the truth came out. She was 17 years old, finishing high school, when she met my biological father. A 19-year-old boy, medical student, son of a humble family. They fell in love in that intense and naive way only teenagers can. When she discovered she was pregnant, his family wanted to take responsibility, wanted to get married. But Helen's family, traditional and concerned with appearances, refused. They said she would ruin her life and his if she continued with that madness. They sent her to a rest home in the countryside, where she had the baby away from society's judging eyes. Father cried, when, took, you, he, wanted, stay, not, allowed. He wanted to raise me? I asked, feeling a new layer of pain. My biological father wanted to keep me? Yes, found. Adopters, guaranteed. Good, family, followed, from distance, died, 2 years later, accident. So he died. My biological father died without ever really knowing me, but having made sure I would go to a good family. And Helen lived with this secret, with this pain, all these years. Why keep this? I asked, feeling anger mixed with compassion. Why not look for me earlier? Why leave everything for now? Fear, shame, later. You, happy, did not want, destroy your peace. And there was the hardest truth of all. She didn't look for me, not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. Because she saw I had a good life and didn't want to be selfish, didn't want to drag her own regrets into my happiness. But you eventually looked for me, I said softly. In recent months. Why? 84 years, time, running out, needed you, no, loved, always loved. In that moment, something inside me broke and rebuilt simultaneously. The anger I was carrying, the feeling of abandonment, all of it began to transform into something more complex, more mature. It wasn't black and white. It wasn't a villain and victim story. It was the story of a 17-year-old girl who made an impossible decision and lived with the consequences for almost 70 years. I held her hand more firmly. I don't know if I can call you mother, I confessed. I already have a mother, and she's incredible. But maybe we can have some kind of connection in the days we have left. She squeezed my hand, and for the first time since the revelation happened, I saw something like peace in her eyes. Charles entered the room at that moment. He'd been keeping emotional distance, processing not only the revelation about me, but also the confirmation about Robert being a half-brother. But now he approached and placed his hand on my shoulder. You know, he said, I spent the last few days angry. Angry at my mother for lying, for keeping secrets, for not trusting us. But then I thought about my own choices, my own secrets, the things I did in business that I don't want my children to know, the mistakes I made, and I realized we're all just humans trying to do the best we can with impossible situations. He looked at his mother in the bed. Mom, I don't know if I can say I completely understand your choices, but I can say I forgive you, and that in a way I'm grateful. Because without your choices, we wouldn't have Marina here now. Beatrice and Robert entered together. There was a new dynamic between them, an acceptance of their family's complexities that didn't exist before. Beatrice held my other hand. I don't know what this means for us, she said honestly. I don't know if we'll be siblings, friends, or just acquaintances united by DNA. But I want to try to figure it out. I want to know you. Robert smiled. That smile I was already starting to recognize as genuine. Welcome officially to the mess that is the Richardson family. It's complicated, it's confusing, but at least it's never boring. For the first time in days, I laughed. A genuine laugh, even amid all the tears and confusion. Mrs. Helen passed away 5 days after the revelation. It was peaceful, surrounded by her 4 children. Yes, 4, because in those last days, somehow strange and unexpected, I became part of that family. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath, and I whispered, "Thank you for giving me life, for giving me to parents who loved me, for finding me at the end. Thank you." The will she had kept for so many years wasn't just about revelations. It was also about reparations. Helen had left a significant part of her inheritance to me, enough to change my life completely. But more important than the money were the letters. Dozens of letters she had written over the years, never sent, documenting her thoughts, her regrets, her unspoken love. I read each one, crying at every line. Letters written on my first birthday, when she wondered if I was okay, if I was happy. Letters on my 10th birthday, imagining what kind of child I had become. Letters when I turned 18, when she learned through the investigator that I had decided to be a nurse. One letter in particular marked me deeply. It was from 2 years ago, right after Margaret, my adoptive mother, had beaten breast cancer. Helen had discovered through the investigator and wrote, "My dear Marina, today I learned your mother is in remission from cancer. I cried with relief. Margaret Silva is the woman I chose to raise you, and every day I thank God for her. She was the mother I didn't have the courage to be. She gave you the love I could only give from afar. If there's anything good I did in life, it was ensuring you were hers. Because among all the families Dr. Paul found, I chose the Silvas. I chose Margaret and Joseph because I saw in them what I wanted you to have. Unconditional love, genuine simplicity, solid values. I never regretted that choice. I only regret not having the courage to know the incredible woman you became sooner. I showed this letter to Margaret. We cried together, embraced in the living room of the house where I grew up, surrounded by photos of a happy childhood. She loved you the only way she could, Margaret said, and I thank her for it, for giving you life, for giving me you. The funeral was a surreal experience. I was there as a nurse who cared for her, as a recently discovered biological daughter, as a familiar stranger. Charles introduced me to people as our sister Marina, and every time I heard that, I felt a tightness in my heart. Not for the word itself, but for the weight of everything it carried. In the months that followed, I developed an unexpected relationship with my half-siblings. Charles became a kind of mentor, helping me navigate the complexities of inheritance and investments. Beatrice invited me to regular lunches, where we talked about books, philosophy, and gradually, about Helen and the complexities of family memory. Robert became my favorite. His brutal honesty and dark sense of humor were exactly what I needed to process everything. One day, 6 months after Helen's death, the four of us were gathered for what would be the final division of assets. The lawyer had finished explaining the details when Charles pulled out one last envelope. She left specific instructions, he explained. This envelope should only be opened when all of us were together, 6 months after her death. Inside was a final letter, addressed to all 4 children. I'll read only the most important parts. My beloved children, if you're reading this, it means you've found a way to be together. Charles, Beatrice, Robert, and Marina. Each of you represents a different part of my life, the choices I made, the paths I took. I kept secrets that seemed necessary at the time, but now I understand that secrets are like poison. They protect in the moment, but slowly kill. To Robert, forgive me for never having the courage to be open about your origin. You were always my son, as much as the others. My love for you was never less, just more complicated by guilt. To Beatrice and Charles, forgive me for creating a family based on appearances and not on truths. You deserved honesty. To Marina, forgive me for the biggest mistake of my life, letting fear be greater than love. Every day away from you was a lost day. But if there's something I don't regret, it was ensuring you had extraordinary parents. The Silvas are, and always will be, your true family. To all of you. Family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up in difficult moments. It's about forgiveness when it's easier to hold grudges. I hope my failures, my secrets, my complicated story, instead of separating you, unite you. Because in the end, we're all just imperfect humans trying to love the best way we know. There was silence when Charles finished reading. Then Robert, always him, broke the tension. Well, she was right about one thing. We're definitely a complicated family. But maybe the best families are the complicated ones, the ones that have to work to stay together. Today, almost a year after all this, I still work as a nurse at St. Luke's. I use part of Helen's inheritance to fund a scholarship for young people from low-income families who want to study nursing. It's my way of honoring both Helen and the Silvas, recognizing where I came from and who made me who I am. I had lunch with Beatrice last week. She showed me photos of young Helen, of my biological father, Paul. I saw my own face reflected in them. I saw where my smile comes from, my eye shape, my way of tilting my head when I'm thinking. I gained a past I didn't know, roots I didn't know I had. But when I come home at the end of the day, it's to the Silva house. It's Margaret who hugs me and asks how my day was. It's Joseph who jokes about me being an heiress now. Because family, I learned, isn't where you started. It's where you grew, where you were loved, where you chose to belong. If this story touched your heart in any way, know that you're not alone. We all carry our own battles, our fears, our doubts. But that's exactly why stories like this need to be told and heard. If you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope, share this video. Sometimes, one story can be the light someone needs to keep going. And if you have your own story to tell, leave it here in the comments. This space is ours. It's safe. And every word matters. I read every comment, and I know many of you also read and find strength in each other's experiences. See you in the next video with another story that will move your heart. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of those you love, and remember, life is always worth it. A warm hug, and until next time.